Bring this workshop to order. Thank you all for joining us today. And Madam Clerk.
Mr. Mayor, our first item is the adoption of the agenda.
Do I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
Second.
A motion and a second to adopt the agenda as printed.
Our
All in
first-
favor, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we have an agenda.
Our first item is 2023-502, GRU presentation on fuels, fuel levelization process, wastewater connection charges, and streetlight rates, with the recommendation that the City Commission hear a presentation from staff.
Very good, thank you. And I would note, before we get started, that this is a workshop and that we are not able to take action today. Mr. Cunningham.
Yes, so Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, as you know, we've been in a multi-month process that is going to continue even after this. But today is really focused on fuels, our fuel levelization process, and we've not done that in our budget presentations before. But with a lot of activity last year and a lot of questions, we wanted to kind of bring more discussion to the table with the City Commission. And so we've got that fuels levelization process. And then we're going to touch on some of the other fees and charges that we have as a utility outside of our typical base rates or fuels that we want to touch on. And we typically do that annually as well. We have different staff folks that are going to be presenting today. So I'm just going to ask them as they come up to introduce themselves and their role. And they're going to just come up one after another as we go to the different topics.
Excellent.
So with that, Mr. Walters.
Welcome, Mr. Walters.
Mayor Commissioners, Eric Walters.
Tie, I like that.
Oh, thank you. I figured I represent the Gators today. Go Gators. Eric Walters, Interim Chief Sustainability Officer. I'll be going over a portion of this, the fuels budget, which is the generation planning portion. It really does the modeling for the generation for that time period, and that feeds into how we create the fuels budget from there. So I'll handle the generation dispatch, the model dispatch, and the process, and then I'll invite the fuels manager, Patrice Caffley, to come up and cover the second part, which is developing the budget, the methodology, process, components, and then it'll be an overview of FY23 versus FY24 budget. So first, I think it's prudent to start off with a definition of economic dispatch. And that's simply the operation of generation facilities to produce energy at the lowest cost to reliably serve customers. And you have to recognize any operational limits, generation limits, transmission, and regulatory requirements as well. So all of those are factored into economic dispatch. We'll start off with just an overview of the load shapes for the city of Gainesville. It's pretty cyclical. And so these are pretty representative of what we see throughout the year. So just to quickly orient you here, we'll start with the yellow, and that's a typical winter day. And of course, winter is relative in Florida, right? But we're talking lows in the 30s, highs in the mid 50s or so. Cold in the morning, so you typically see a peak, and then gets cooler, and then a bump in the evening. People are coming home at the same time, doing their habits, hobbies, cooking dinner, watching their show, whatever it is. Spring day is pretty flat, starting off here low in the morning with a gradual rise and then a bump in the evening. Same effect, people getting home at the same time. Summer day, which is what we're going into right now, as soon as the humidity hits in May, you typically see that cycle. So it's low in the morning and then high in the evenings, and then fall is pretty flat across the day. The thing to note here from these presentations or these curves is actually the low point in the winter or the spring day here and the high point in the summer day. It points out the importance of generation and flexibility during that time period to be able to meet the different needs and demands of our system. So we go anywhere from 130 megawatts as a low to 430 megawatts as a high. And our generation has to be able to span that range and do that economically as well. Some key terms that we'll refer back to as we go through this. The first is unit commitment, and that's really a schedule of the most cost-effective generation units that meet the load forecast and regulation and reserve requirements. So translated, that means we look at our load forecast and we pick the units or the schedule of units that we think will best fit that need. The next is the average net operating heat rate, or AN-hour. And that's a common measure of system efficiency for a generating unit, best equated to miles per gallon in a car. The next one is an incremental heat rate, the change in fuel and heat input for 1 unit change in output. If you're going to translate that into a phrase, that means it helps us calculate the most economical megawatt, the next most economical megawatt. So it helps us decide how to ramp our units up and down. And then startup and shutdown cost. There's a cost to starting up generation, obviously. There's times where that generation is warming up, where it's spinning, where there is no power being generated, but fuel is still being consumed. And so those costs are also captured in this analysis. So with the modeling process, we start with our load data for the defined period. That could be anywhere from hours to years, and everywhere in between. So you define which period you want to study. You look at your available generating units during that study period. Depending on how long it is, you could be looking at outages for units, and so you have to figure out how you replace that unit that's no longer available there. Recognize any generation operating limits, so ramp rates, up and down, how fast a unit can change output, the electrical output, and any max and minimum generation levels, as well as the cost of generating, which depends on the heat rate, the variable operating cost, which includes fuel and some non-fuel cost, any variable cost for environmental compliance, and any startup cost. And I think there's an important note at the bottom that any fixed cost, may it be fixed O&M, any debt service, et cetera, are never used in economic dispatch. Those are all excluded from economic dispatch. And the next slide kind of goes through an example of what that is and why. All right, so say we're traveling from Gainesville to the Grand Canyon and back, right? We want to come up with the cost for a trip to the Grand Canyon. When you come up with what you're going to factor into how much it's going to cost you, you'll look at, first of all, your fuel cost. How efficient is your car? How many miles per gallon do you get? What's the distance that you're going? You also factor in any maintenance that you have to do, oil changes, tire rotations, any repairs that you need to do to get your car ready or vehicle ready to go and get back. Lodging, we're not going to sleep on the street, so we have to figure out what we're going to do to lodge, either a campground or, we're staying at a hostel or with relatives or what have you, but you have to figure in those costs, as well as food. And so some of the fixed costs that you would not consider is your car note. If you have one, you're going to pay that anyway. So that's not something you factor into totaling that cost to travel to the Grand Canyon and back. Also, your mortgage. I wish they gave a discount for that, but they don't. If you don't sleep in your home, they don't give discounts. So you still have to pay your full mortgage every month. And so that's not something you factor into that cost, even though it is a cost that you have. So economic dispatch is very similar. You count the cost that it takes to run that unit to generate that power at the time, not necessarily your ongoing long-term fixed cost. So when we look at this, we have a load forecast. We look at our load forecast and our annual net operating heat rate, and that's used to create our unit commitment. And so that tells us what generating units we're going to use in a particular day to meet that load. And ramp rates and response times must also be considered. And I've got the example here of a Tesla Roadster versus a Prius. One accelerates very, very quickly and will tie you to the back of your seat. The other, not so much. But the Prius, if you're going on a long trip, is the one that is very conservative in fuel and least cost over a long distance. It depends on what you're using or what your goal is with that unit. So sometimes we have to respond quickly where we need power in less than 15 minutes, and it has to go from cold steel to producing power. That cost structure is very different from a unit that say takes 12 hours to start up, but very efficient over a long period of time. So once the units are online, you then take the incremental heat rate, and that determines which units are loaded. So looking at this incremental heat rate, this is simply for illustrative purposes only. None of these numbers are real. They are not tied to real data. This is just to illustrate the point of what you would do to make an incremental heat rate decision. Let me repeat, these are not real numbers. They're tied to nothing real. But when you look at units in this example, you have these three costs of units loaded at minimum load, and you want to know the next most economical megawatt. It's not a trick question. It's simply the lowest next megawatt or lowest cost there, and that's CC1. And so, for instance, if you're loading up your system, you would load up that lowest cost unit first. If you still need more load, you would load up the next most effective or cost-effective unit, which in this case would be DHR. And as you're backing down a load, you do it in the opposite fashion. So you back down the most expensive megawatts first, and then the least expensive megawatts after that. That effectively minimizes your cost as you're responding to the different load shapes that we've talked about. And so we don't use our fingers and toes or napkins to crunch these numbers. We actually have an energy model that does that. It is used for unit commitment as well as long-term planning, and is what we call a deterministic model. And deterministic simply means that there is one right answer, and that right answer is the cheapest one. Even if it's 1 cent cheaper than the next option, it's going to give you the cheapest option. There are some models that give you kind of a range of outcomes, and they tell you the most likely outcome by varying fuel price and outages and things that you can't predict. It throws anomalies in there. But for this model that we use, it's simply the cheapest option that comes out. After that, we then apply things like reliability, availability, system constraints. We apply on top of that cheapest model after that's determined. So for example, with GenTrader, you'll take all the information that we've discussed so far, your unit data, your heat rate curves, dispatch limits, O&M cost, ramp rates. You'll take all of your fuel data, your forecast for your fuels and your pricing for that time period, any purchases and sales that you may have, any load data that you may have, and you plug it all into GenTrader, and then it gives you that cheapest option to meet the load during that time period. And so during that scenario, it will actually give you how many megawatts hours in total is generated during that time period, the total volume of fuel that is consumed, and any fuel expense that's associated with that fuel, as well as any variable O&M and run hours. And so GenTrader provides that, and then at least for the budget period, we take that output, and that goes into part of how the rest of the fuels budget is developed. So if there are no more questions for me, I will pass it to Patrice Caffley, our fuels manager, to go through that next portion.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Mayor, Commissioners, Patrice Caffley, Fuels Manager. So my portion of the fuels budget presentation will go through the mechanics of how the budget is constructed, so more the process and the math behind the actual expenses themselves. So the major, all the line items in the fuels budget will typically have two components, price and volume, and that contributes to the expense of each of those line items. For the prices, that's a combination of internal pricing components for contracts that we have in-house, as well as external independent market projections that we will get from private and governmental agencies. I'll give you some examples of those. So on our contract side, we will have components like ammonia and diesel. Those are contracts that we have in place for those commodity types. Independent publications, we'll contract with data houses like Argus, Coal Daily, and S&P Platts. For regular publications, they have in-house analysts that does studies and will do forecast for each commodity type. The main federal agency that we'll utilize is the Energy Information Administration. They collate a lot of data. They do a lot of forecasting related to the energy industry. We'll also utilize different indices such as the NYMEX, New York Mercantile Exchange, as well as Bureau of Labor Statistics, where we'll utilize CPI, PPI data, and different commodity indices. On the volume side, the major line items will be an output from the GenTrader model that Eric just mentioned. But for a manual forecast, we'll utilize volume drivers. For example, the amount of fly ash that's generated will be dependent on the volume of biomass that we'll burn for combustion. So if there's a high correlation between different line items, then we'll use a volume driver. When there's not a high correlation between variables, we'll utilize historical data and averages to calculate and forecast what we expect volumes should be going forward. And one of those examples I have here is for our local distribution company. The local distribution company, or LDC, is the natural gas that's utilized by residential, commercial, and industrial users. And we'll forecast the volume here using data that we've collected over the years. The idea is that we will pick what would be typical. Here we've calculated a 3-year average and a monthly average. The idea is that we'll take the smoothest curve. Here we've chosen the 3-year average, which is that green line. Let me see how this works here. Oops. All right, the green line here. And that's the smoothest line to eliminate any spikes and dips in the data. You'll notice that we calculate monthly averages, but that's because the usage is very seasonal. You'll see that there's higher usage in the winter months, which is the beginning of the year and the ending of the year for heating uses, and in the middle of the year during summer, when there's higher electric usage for cooling, the volumes are a lot lower. Okay, so the first part of the modeling cycle is that my department will forecast prices, delivered prices. And that is one of the major inputs in the model, as that will determine how the units are dispatched. We'll construct short-term forecasts, for example, for a budget process, which is typically 2 years. But we also do longer-term forecasts. We'll extrapolate that data using some of the methods I mentioned earlier. For example, a 10-year forecast we'll utilize for a 10-year site plan, which we submit annually to the PSC, or for when we're going through an IRP process, a 20-year forecast. And we'll utilize different statistical methods, very often using, for example, a regression analysis to extrapolate out that data. That goes as an input, as I said, into the generation model. Output we'll get back is expenses, megawatts, MMBTUs, and so forth. And we'll use that information to construct a lot of our manual forecasts. The major output out of the model falls in these 4 categories right here, but based on that, we also have some manual forecasts, and I'll cover some of those in my next slides. So my next 3 slides will go through the different components of each of the fuel commodities. For the biomass, we'll have the delivered commodity itself, which is the wood delivered to the plant. There's also a service fee paid to a contractor for doing that purchasing work. This contractor has certified foresters on staff that performs the purchasing and makes sure all the requirements are met for wood procurement. We'll utilize a ammonia product for emissions control, and as a result of the combustion process, we'll have some byproducts generated, bottom ash as well as fly ash, which we pay a fee for disposing of those. And those are some of the items that I mentioned that we will use for, we'll perform a manual forecast to forecast those expenses. We also have some miscellaneous expenses related to lab equipment, surveys, annual surveys and audits that we conduct throughout the year, as well as diesel for the fuel pile maintenance. Coal has similar type expenses because it's another solid fuel, but this will be the third year that we are not forecasting any coal usage. We do include it in here just for information purposes that should we use coal for generation, these are all added together to contribute to coal generation. Coal right now is just an emergency fuel, and so we'll only utilize coal for generation during conditions where gas is limited or it's not able to make it. For example, when we had that Texas freeze-off, that's when we were able to burn coal because we just couldn't get enough gas here at that particular time. So as I said, the delivered commodity, so that includes the product itself as well as transportation. Lime, which is a pebble lime product, is a calcium product for SO2 control, and also byproducts generation from the combustion process, scrubber byproduct, as well as fly ash. We also incur expenses for maintaining our rail cars, just like we would our cars at home, and other miscellaneous expenses, including ad valorem taxes from different counties and states that we pass through, or the train passes through, and quality analysis and audits that we conduct throughout the year, as well as diesel for our fuel pile maintenance as well. On the natural gas side, we'll have the gas commodity itself, as well as transportation. This is pipeline transportation, so it's underground transportation. There's charges for capacity, which could be either firm or non-firm. Firm just means we have that portion of the transportation under contract, and we use a combination of both firm and non-firm, as well as a charge for using that space on the pipeline. There's also a fuel portion, a fuel cost associated with that, and this is a charge that the pipeline passes on to users for running the compressor stations along the pipeline. So it's built in to the price of natural gas. On a monthly basis, we'll also secure a base load volume of natural gas to take us through each month, and that's purchased a month ahead. On natural gas as well, we'll subscribe. As I mentioned, we have Argus Cold Gas Daily, where we have subscription where we keep abreast of the market, different price changes, so we're staying abreast of what's going on in the market. And the last item on here is expenses we may incur due to hedging, which may be option premiums, brokerage fees, and so on. The three items I mentioned before are the three main components for our generation at our plants. This portion is the purchase power component, so it's more the energy that goes towards serving our local load. We have market purchases. There's no long-term purchase agreements in place at the moment, and hasn't been for a while. All our purchases are either hourly, day ahead, or we'll do block purchases to cover any period where we may have a unit in outage to cover that period and so forth. In addition to that, there is cost associated with the solar feed-in tariff program, our G2 landfill contract, which ends at the end of this calendar year, I believe, and costs that are associated with renewable energy credits. So costs that we pay for maintaining our assets on a national registry, fees for transfer or retirement of those credits. And each megawatt is equivalent to 1 credit. Okay, so this is a comparison of the current fiscal year as well as the forecasted fiscal year. In FY '23, generation, purchase power, as well as expenses for the LDC, it was $127.6 million. For FY '24, we're forecasting the equivalent to be $107.2 million. And that drop in $20 million is as a result of the drop in natural gas prices. The majority of that is the drop in natural gas prices from last year to this year. And this is just showing the portion of fuel compared to the entire GRU budget. The fuel budget is almost a quarter of the entire GRU budget. It's not a part of base rate, and it's one of the major contributing expenses to the fuel adjustments. And that is all that I have for the fuel section. If there's any questions for me?
I don't see any questions. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome.
All right, good afternoon, Mr. Mayor. Christy Mitchell, Rates Analyst in our GRU's Rates and Forecasting Department. One of the responsibilities for our department is to monitor the fuel levelization fund and the rate, along with reporting that information up to our general manager. The fuel adjustment rate is one of the charges that customers see on the electric portion of their GRU bill. This charge is separate from the customer charge and the base rate charges that you see. The fuel adjustment charge is solely used to collect funds for fuel cost. This illustration is to show you how the fuel adjustment is calculated, which is also shown in more detail in Ordinance Section 27-28. In this example, we are using actuals for the month of March, which are posted during the month of April. This then determines the rate that to be charged starting May 1st. So we run on what's called a second preceding month schedule for this calculation. The objective with this calculation is to balance fuel revenues with fuel expenses. On the left of this illustration is the fuel revenue, which is collected from the customers as the fuel adjustment charge by kilowatt hour of usage. On the right is the fuel expenses that Patrice just went over for our generation fuels as well as our purchase power fuels. So staff evaluates the fuel adjustment charge monthly, as shown in the previous visuals, and sends that information to the general manager for approval. And just as a reminder, the fuel revenue is a pass-through, and that is used only for fuel expense obligations. So it is not used to meet any other expenses, nor is there any markup on that. Also, the majority of fuel revenue is collected from our fuel adjustment line item that you see on the bill. There's also a small portion collected within the base rates, and that's also referred to as taxable fuel. So fuel revenue is levelized each month so that the money is added or subtracted to equal the fuel expense. The difference between the actual fuel revenue and the fuel expense creates a balance that must be met in the future billing periods. Consideration of this balance is factored in along with comparison of the fuel revenue and the fuel expense when we determine the rate. The objective of this analysis is to steer the balance towards zero. If the balance is positive, this means our fuel revenues have been over-collected, and we work towards reducing the fuel adjustment rate to move money back to the customers. If the balance is negative, this means that we have under-collected for the cost of fuel, and the fuel adjustment charge needs to recover the balance plus the current fuel expense. Currently, GRU's fuel adjustment balance is negative, which I will go into more detail in the upcoming slides. Another thing that's also noted in ordinance is the guidance on the fuel levelization fund balance. So we utilize a percentage of the annual fuel budget that Patrice discussed as the scale to build our positive and negative ranges for that fuel levelization fund. And changes to the fuel adjustment charge fall under the responsibility of our general manager. So a little more on the history of our fuel levelization fund balance and the rates that have been charged over the past few years. So GRU did not increase the fuel adjustment charge from the time period between May 2020 through August of 21. We held the rate at 30 mils, which is the same as saying 3 cents per kilowatt hour of usage. This was a management decision at that time and was due mostly to the sensitivities related to the pandemic. By September of 21, our fuel balance had fallen negative to 11.3 million. And approximately a year later, we hit a low point of negative 26 million in August of 22 as we continued to undercollect the true fuel expense. There were multiple factors that contributed to the high fuel expenses that were felt by utilities all over. For example, the global energy markets experienced significant volatility, and natural gas prices were driven up substantially. By the end of fiscal year 22, our fuel levelization balance fund was at a negative 21.1 million. Therefore, it's no longer sustainable to keep the fuel rate at the existing level. So GRU implemented multiple fuel rate increases between November of 21 and through July of 22 to try and mitigate this negative balance, as well as covering the continuing high fuel prices. Ultimately, the fuel rate was increased from 30 mils to 80 mils during that time, or from 3 cents to 8 cents per kilowatt hour of usage. The attempt was to raise the rate as little as possible to recover fuel costs, but costs continued to rise and the fuel fund continued to drop. So that was why the multiple increases were needed during this time. These increases ultimately aided in recovering the fuel expense in recent months, and as of March of 23, the fuel levelization balance has pulled up to a negative 5.7 million. Therefore, GRU was able to reduce our millage rate from 80 mils to 65 mils starting in April of 23. Okay, and then this slide is just a visual representation of that information I just discussed. The green line that you see is the levelization balance that dates back to October of 2020. So you can see how the fund dipped negative in about the, I think, May of 21 point, and we continued to undercollect through most of fiscal year 22. But you can also see how the fuel fund has recovered during the past about 7 months. This was due to a combination of the fuel rate as well as the fuel prices themselves coming back down in the market. We have reached negative 5.7 million as of March actuals, and we are projecting to steer that balance back to the 0 mark in the coming months. And then this final slide I have is just, this is the data backup for that graph. And it's way too much to read on the screen, but in your backup that just lists all the expenses and revenues and where that levelization balance was each month. And then that final column there is what that fuel rate that was charged to the customers each month. So this concludes my presentation. So let me know if there are any questions on this.
We do have questions on that one. Commissioner Willits.
Mr. Mayor, so the purpose of the fuel levelization, as you described, month to month to some degree, expenses the previous month, start the next month ideally to recover them.
Yes.
Through the adjustment. So ideally, somewhat close to when you use, you would end up paying. You know, but my question is about, particularly because of what happened in 2022, when GRU, the commission decided, in essence, or GRU decided to start digging out of the hole. is that all electric households, everyone uses electricity in the summer, right? Or particularly, everyone's running air conditioner. But in the winter, it's not true that everyone is running, as nearly as much electric as people who have gas furnaces, gas water heaters, particularly gas furnaces. So it's a little concerning that there is some unfairness inherent in this, correct? That if we don't collect it very close to when the use, we shift the burden to all electric households who in the winter still continue to use quite a bit. We see the spikes in the winter in electric use. And it's for furnaces, it's for electric furnaces, or heat pumps. So some of this is getting, is it accurate to say that some of the burden, when we did what we did between 22 and 23, is that the burden is being shifted away, in essence, everyone who has air conditioner in the summer to just all electric households in the winter that are running their heat pump or electric resistance heaters. We're shifting some of the fuel burden to them in the winter when they're using, but people who are using fossil gas heaters, they're not using nearly as much electricity.
So, Mr. Mayor, I'll take a shot. So, in general, the process is inherently not precise, right? So we're buying fuel to generate power. We're trying to predict how much to charge for that, and then we're kind of truing up as you go. And so inherently, it's not a perfect process. The shifting of these expenses because of the curve that you saw got pushed out further in time than we would want. And in fact, we have had a lot of internal discussion about the changing of that fuel adjustment and doing it more frequently and doing it more mathematically as we move forward into the future. And we're drafting some policies over what that would look like so that you don't get as far down the road. But I will say, to answer Commissioner's question, inherently it is not precise. And this is the practice in the industry, and all utilities do it this way. You're trying the best to project future usage, project future prices as you set a rate, and then you're coming back and you're making sure you true that up over time using the fuel levelization balance as a way to sort of keep track of that. So there is some of that shift, and we're trying to minimize that. The entire industry experienced what you see here, which is the rates skyrocketed, so they tripled. So if you think of gas at the gas pump and it goes up 20 cents, it seems like a lot. These were doubled and then tripled the amount. And so it was very difficult to sort of keep up and catch up with that. And you see that balance going down, and then it's taken us a while to go back up. We could have come back up more quickly if you raise the fuel adjustment drastically. We made the decision to do that over time so that you're not getting that dramatic impact in 1 month or 2 months, but you're getting that impact to our customers over a longer period of time. And so there is a decision you could make to we could have tripled the fuel adjustment immediately or gone even higher to get rid of the deficit. We slowly ramped up over time, and then we've held that steady for the last, I guess it's been about a year now. So I don't know if that fully answers your question.
I want a yes or no question. Did what happened in 22 and 23, in essence, shift the burden from, for lack of a better term, those who use fossil gas to heat their homes and perhaps water as well, but mostly heat, to all electric households because of just the timing that all electric, they use more than the gas heated households in winter, and because we picked it up in, was it October 2022 is when we started, roughly September, October is when we finally started to dig out of that hole. And I kind of just want a yes or no question, and I know that things are imperfect, but this was this wasn't a month-to-month decision about that wasn't perfect. This was like a year, as we said, all through 22 as this started, and then when we did make a decision, just slow, but I still kind of want my point. I want to understand in the end the imperfections. Is it affecting more so all electric households which are common.
It
Florida,
is
common here.
impacting all households for sure. I mean, all electric customers are paying the same fuel adjustment, so it would be impacting all electric.
Excuse me, I mean all dash electric, as in those who do not have gas coming into their home. All electric house. I have an all electric household in something like, I don't know, so probably 70-80% of homes in Florida are all electric, right? There's no natural gas coming into my home. So I'm an all electric household. So in the winter, when these prices got expensive, I'm heating using electricity, not natural gas, and particularly electric fuel, where it got a little crazy, right?
So maybe this will help. I'm trying to do my best. So there is also a purchase gas adjustment. So a household that has natural gas coming to their house for heating, they had the same thing sort of occur to their purchase gas adjustment, similar to this adjustment as well.
Sure,
So
but a
both
non-electric, a non-gas household never uses gas, so they're not, that portion, they're not contributing to, this disequilibrium of the levelization balance. But like I said, everyone uses electricity. It's just that some people in the winter don't have to use nearly as much. And so to me, it feels like, and it's fine if there's not an answer, but it feels like to me, because of what we did in the past, and because this is a kind of crazy time, but to me, it still looks like all electric households end up bearing the brunt of paying for, like, in essence, everyone's previous summer usage, right? And we're covering later in the year, but when the expense happens in the summer, let's say, or here the fall, still hot in Florida, but you're paying it off in the winter, well, who's using the most electricity in the winter? It's not people with natural gas furnaces. It's people with electric furnaces like me, or heat pumps.
So I'm looking at staff. I'm not sure there's a
Am I making this up?
I'm not sure there's a way to define that amount. I guess my point is that both there's a purchase gas adjustment that is anybody that's on natural gas, so they're paying an adjustment on both the electric and the gas to heat their home in the winter, and then electric customers are just paying on the generation cost of the fuel adjustment.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Eastman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd say it a slightly different way, Commissioner Willis. Like, it looks like this was sort of like we held off on paying our bills for a couple of months and then decided we were going to pay it all at once, right? It was sort of like it looks like we kept it at about 30 mils. So it was about $30 on your fuel adjustment charge, and then increased fairly rapidly over the summer of 2022 to 8 mils, which would be $80. I think this is a really important chart, or showing the millage, because when we talk about high GRU rates, I mean, in some ways we're talking about slightly higher than average GRU base rates, the rates that we all set up here. But we do have the highest fuel adjustment rate in the state of Florida, which means that this particular impact of having our fuel adjustment kind of not be adjusted over time and then suddenly ramp up really had a huge impact on people over the summer. I know I was out knocking on doors during that time period. We were talking a lot about it, but also just on like where we sit in terms of how our GRU rates are going. Mr. Manager, it's hard to tell on this one, but on the other slide you can see it much more clearly. I'm sure that there was a reason at the time that we were choosing to keep low, even though we saw natural gas prices going up. But it looks like the impact of that really was that people saw very rapid increases all at one time over the summer. I don't know if you want to speak more on that, or if there's something we can do in the future, because to me, one of the biggest issues as it relates to utility bills is high bills are hard, right? We want to keep GRU bills low. But it's really hard when suddenly you get your bill in and it's twice as much as what you thought you had budgeted for. Mm-hmm. And so having some kind of balance between that as it goes over, I think is really important. And it looks like we came up short of that in the way that we handled this from 21 to 22. I don't know if you want to speak more on that.
Sure, yeah. So I can speak precisely to beginning in 2022 when I came into this role. Our fuel levelization balance was around 15 million, negative 15 million. And at that time, natural gas prices were rising. And so what we were trying to do each month, to Commissioner Willett's point, is we were trying to recover that so you're not spreading that out too far in the advance. But natural gas prices were outpacing what we were establishing. And they continued to outpace it. And they were a surprise to everyone in the industry how rapidly that was increasing. So to Commissioner Eastman's point of we increased very rapidly, yeah, we did, because natural gas prices increased rapidly during that time. And so we had two challenges. One is we were starting at a lower level to begin with, and then the prices were going up. And so we were adjusting each month. I think it was 5 months in a row, we adjusted from around 50 mils up to the 80 mils. And when we got up to the 80 mils, we finally got to a point where we weren't dropping more. We were starting to see the turn upward. And then we kept it at that 80 mils for an extended period of time until April 1st. And the reason we did that is we have the band that we're trying to adjust to stay within is essentially about negative 5 million to 10 million. And we're on the path of crossing that bottom band. So we were able to reduce it. And then we're going to hopefully reduce it again very soon if the projection of natural gas prices stay where they are. So to your point, we were attempting to try to get the customers to pay as the fuel was coming, but it was two pieces of the recovery as well as the rapidly increasing prices that made that, continue to make that difficult throughout the year.
Yeah, and Mr. Manager, I appreciate you guys doing this by the numbers, and I get that it was before your time. I just look at these numbers here where we're at 30 mils, and in June of 21, we lost 2.6 million. The next month it was 2.7 million. The month after that was 2.7 million. It looked like there should have been some time in there that we recognized that we were undervaluing this and that we were going to have to come back at some point. And I would just like to see us in the future. I know this is before your time. This is the former GRU general manager, but in the future, try to follow the numbers, try to understand this, because this seemingly had a huge impact, and certainly on my constituents. I was out talking with people and on a lot of people's paychecks. So at the time when that fuel adjustment was going up, and it was the summer, and people were starting to move into a higher category based on our number of kilowatt hours that they were utilizing. So they were going up to a higher amount. So I appreciate you trying to get that under control, and I'd like to see GRU continue to try to solidify that process a little bit more so that it will follow exactly what needs to happen in order to make that up, instead of kind of guesstimating the impact of the pandemic or things like that, that this should be done by the book instead.
So, Mr. Mayor, I appreciate that, and I think that's precisely, I'm hearing the feedback that bringing a policy forward to do that on a more kind of mathematical basis makes sense to the board, and so I think we'll continue to put that together and bring that forward.
All right. Thank you. That's almost
Thank you, Commissioner. To follow up on that, we've talked many times about, I would really like to use a different strategy. So when we anticipate an increase like this, it doesn't come after us quite as hard. And nobody ever intended for that kind of spike to exist. Nobody had any thought that the natural gas prices would go up 300%. But knowing that is a thing that can happen now, and having experienced it, I would love to see us have a different policy for approaching it, so that we don't just kind of stand back and hope for the best and find out that we didn't get the best and that it got very expensive very quickly. So, but I know that you're working on that, and I know that those are some models that might be considered in the future. So, thank you. All right. I don't have any more lights on that one unless you wanted to make any more comments on that. Or
No, Mr. Mayor, I mean, I think the reason we can move on to Brett's presentation. The reason we go through the fuels is, as a summary, it's 25% of our budget. We're budgeting $107 million for it next year, so it's a significant part of us providing power to our constituents. Our staff works very, very diligently to try to keep that cost as low as possible on our customers. So what Eric went through with economic dispatch, our hedging policies, looking at how we provide that power to our customers as low a cost as possible is a very big part of our business, and we have a lot of staff dedicated to that. And so again, we wanted to go through that and appreciate the feedback, and I think we're all on the same page of sort of the policy and going forward, and I think that would be a very good improvement for the utility. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Goodman.
Good afternoon, Mayor. Brett Goodman, Chief Operating Officer. And I'm going to switch gears. We're going to go through water, wastewater connection charges and lighting. So as part of the annual rate making process, we go through, we propose beyond just rate increases, there are fees and related charges that I want to present as well. So the first one I'm going to go through is the water, wastewater connection charges. Just to kind of presentation wise, I'll go through and explain connection charges. To cut to the chase, what we're proposing for 24 from the 23 is on all our fees and connection charges to go up by 0.91%, other than the water tapping fee, and I'll kind of go through that as well. To give some perspective on the 0.91%, it is significantly lower than past years. In 2022 is 5.9%, and then in 2023 we upped it by 8.24%. So we're starting to see some relief with regard to the connection charges that are directly related to the cost it takes to provide these facilities. So what are connection charges? Just the basics are, they are the fees we collect to make the capacity available for new development. So our new development essentially is paying its share so that it's the existing customers are not subsidizing that new development. And it encompasses the capacity at the water plant, the distribution system that takes the water to the customer, the meters, and then also on the wastewater side where you've got the collection system and the plant capacity that we collect, and then ultimately the effluent disposal. So this is a pretty standard water wastewater industry practice. Again, it's the concept is your new development is buying into that capacity that exists. Every so often we do a deep dive into what our cost of service is and kind of look at those costs. And we also have another index we commonly use, which is known as a construction cost index. That's the engineering news record. It's just an industry-specific standard that reflects the costs that we experience in our industry. It's a well-established index. Now, oftentimes when we do the cost of service study, we go and look at, hey, is that cost of service, how does it compare with our construction cost indexes? And what we found is there's pretty good correlation. And in this year, everything other than our main tapping fees, which I'll go into, we're going to follow that industry standard just for convenience. And so the fees that we're proposing to adjust are the water, wastewater connection charges, the water service and meter sets, the plan review and inspection fees, the water tapping fees, and then we have fees specific to the I district, as well as our temporary hydrant water services. So again, what we're proposing to increase is most of these fees, other than the water tapping fee, is increasing those by 0.9%. And to work through an example for a single-family residential home, you kind of provide an example from 2003 to 2024, the differences. So for water, the plant capacity and the distribution system is $1,390. The water meter set is changing to $836. The wastewater is $4,081. So the grand total is around $6,307 if you're in the city, and then if you're in the unincorporated area, there's a 25% surcharge, which brings it up to $7,883. So the importance of this on that unincorporated area, that 25% surcharge goes to our Connect Free program. So that funds our Connect Free program. The other thing I think is important to note is this is for a typical single-family residential house. So for houses that are less than 1,400 square feet, there actually is a different connection charge. So it reduces by 35% for those lower, smaller footprint houses. We went through analysis and showed that there is connection charges are essentially how much demand are you putting on the system on a gallons per day basis. There's from the analysis, there's certainly a evidence that a smaller house around 1,400 square feet is using less of our facilities. So there's a reduction there. In terms of kind of boiling it all down, is these are all the fees that we're proposing to change on the. So you got your water meter sets, and these are all going up by 0.9%. Again, the size of the meter is indicative of the size of the demand. Larger or smaller demands like houses are in that 5-8 meter class, and then you work your way up depending on the development or the need. And then our commercial and multifamily connection charges, again, you can see the differences from 23 to 24 for water and wastewater, and then our I-district fees. What's not coming in fairly clear is down here is that water main tapping charge. That is the one that we're recommending to increase beyond that 0.91%. We've seen pretty significant changes in material prices and felt like we wanted to recover those now and kind of show you where the break is about that 2-inch tap to the 8-inch tap from 23 to 24. We're showing about a $700 to $900 increase in those charges, and those are directly results of increases in prices in those categories. So that's the water wastewater connection charges in a nutshell. Before I go into the lighting program, any questions on those?
We do, Commissioner Book.
Just a terminology question, the I district.
Yep.
So, Mr. Mayor, the I-District it's our infrastructure improvement area. We worked together with CRA, several years ago now, I can't remember exactly, to have an area where there was working with UF and there was development in that area. And what we did was with water and wastewater, as roads were redeveloped through the CRA, we put in new infrastructure for future growth in water, wastewater. That's not our business model. Typically, development pays for that, new facilities as they're built. Since we came ahead of that, the IIA infrastructure improvement area and the fees are built in to pay back the cost of that as development comes in. So as a developer comes in, they're paying connection charges, but they're also paying an additional IIA fee that covers the cost of that infrastructure that they would typically be paying for as they built it. Does that make sense? I kind of talked around it. But and the location of it. So the location of it is over like by the hub area, by Innovation Center. Yeah. And it's a pretty large area. It goes all the way to the Standard on University Avenue, sort of to the north and the west, and then over to about 10th Street or so on the east side. And then south goes to about Depot Avenue, or a little bit beyond.
And then my one comment was just brief, related to essentially being cost neutral on your materials and your supplies and your taps. So I agree with that concept. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Okay, so going on to the lighting and pole program is, so we have about 33,000 lights and poles within our system. When a customer comes in to get lighting and poles, they have three options. The first one is to go it alone, if you will, to somewhere behind their electric meter. They're installing the poles, they're installing the lighting according to all the local ordinances. Then if they don't want to go that route and they want to use GRU, then they have one of two programs. The first one is our contributed program. The second one is our uncontributed program. So the contributed program, the easy way to think about that is the customer is contributing all the costs up front. So all the installation for the poles, the lighting, all that is coming from their pocket. And then any of the replacement costs that occur with the life of those poles and lights. So a car runs over a pole in a parking lot. In the contributed program, they're contributing the time and materials it takes for us to go out there and fix that. And then there's also the monthly service rate for energy, electric rate, and any minor maintenance that are included with that contributed program cost. The uncontributed program is where it's an all-inclusive rental program. So you get a monthly rate. You don't have to pay the upfront costs. So if you don't want to have to worry about lighting or poles, then you have this uncontributed price that is pretty much all-inclusive. So that if there's, again, going through the example, if somebody runs over the pole in the parking lot, or we have a big storm, then we come out there and replace that lighting or pole, whatever the damage is. And then in addition to those, the taxes and electric fuel adjustment are also in both programs additional monthly expenses. With regard to the benefits of the public and rental program, is we have a wide range of options. So if you look in the backup material, there's a large list of all the different lighting and pole options we provide. The program provides maintenance, competitive pricing, reliable service. The contracts are 5 years with exit clauses. The other nice thing about the program is when you get into the program, you get to use GRU engineers. They're very familiar with the requirements, and through all those different options, we have the ability to customize the needs, the customer's needs to our options and different price options. Within those contracts, we have reliable service where we'll get out there on a phone call within 7 business days. And then the other nice thing about the program is it has environmental benefits. Going back to the mass change-out programs, we're replacing older lights with the LED. And then just from a city beautification standpoint, not all lights shine consistently. It's nice to have the one next to the other one shining at a consistent brightness. So it does provide a community benefit. What we're proposing, and to kind of give some context of what we're proposing, is last year GRU went through a cost of service study. And as part of that study, what we found is the lighting component of our program, the rates had kept up with our cost of service pretty consistently. On the poles, what we found is pretty substantial differences between what our cost of services were and what we were charging. And so back then, what we proposed was, rather than taking that substantial increase into 1 year, we proposed doing that over a 3-year program. So this is the 2nd year of that 3-year program. And so that's what we're recommending, is to continue those programmatic increases from that were approved last year, continue those from FY23 to FY24, and then updating those all-inclusive lighting rates to align with our electric rates. Assigning the lighting fixture wattages for the fuel adjustment billing. So both those last two is, when you're in the GRU program, we don't have electric meters that are making the calculation. So the light wattage is a way to estimate the fuel adjustment billing. And then just from different options, we find that there are different fixtures and poles and different standards come in and out. So just part of the process is just eliminating some of those options and adding new ones into the ordinance. To give you some kind of impact in the backup material, there's a lot of different options and a lot of different prices. And again, from the lighting, the monthly rates go from 0 to up to $1.62 per month. And so those are in just kind of on a percentage basis, somewhere in the 0 to 5%. For the poles, they're more in certain categories, they're more significant. So going from 0 increase all the way up to $7.72 per month per pole, depending on that category. And then from the standpoint of, obviously this impacts the county and the city, the impact of the increases. So that for the city lights in the program, it would go from right now the city spends about $2.9 million on the pole and lighting rental program. That increased to about $3.2 million, or $263,000 per year. So that's I just wanted to give you all those impacts with regard to what the pole and lighting program does. All right.
Okay, Commissioner Sacco.
Thank you. Just as you guys are updating all the fees and rates, when do you expect to finish that? Do you expect to finish it by the end of this budget cycle or moving into the next year? Because I know you're trying to slowly.
Yeah, so there'll be another increase next year.
And that should be like the final version that we stick to until we need to adjust it again.
Correct. Yeah, so the idea would be to not let those things fall behind, to make sure that we're, again, taking a look at what that cost of service and keeping on track. In this case, the lighting has kept up, the poles had not.
Okay, and yeah, that's good enough. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Sacco. Commissioner Willetts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For the polls, is it materials or is it labor intensive? What part of that kind of got out of whack?
So I think it's the timing. If you go back to the, I'm going to bring out some of the backup material to help answer that question. Let's pause, look at the overhead. I may just. So I'm just focusing on that 30-foot wood pole, which has been around for a long period of time. So its monthly rate is $8.08, and I think that's because it got into the library really early and was never adjusted forward. Versus, and you can see the amount of increase there across the line. It goes from where our cost of service is, and what we'd recommend is $17.27 versus a newer model is, you can see this, 30-foot aluminum pole where the cost of service looks really close to what our proposed rate is. So again, I think it was more of when it came in the library, we never updated those price. So the wood pole should have been adjusted each year and just fell behind when it was added to its cost was kind of buried in there and never updated.
Okay.
So now we have newer stuff, and it's just, we want to make sure whenever it's added to I keep on thinking about the inventory or the list of options, that those costs are reflective of what a current, in this case, a 32-foot wood pole really is versus what it was several years ago.
So, Mr. Mayor, I think to answer your question directly, the cost of the material was not changed over a 14-year period, and costs went up. And so this is trying to get back trued up to those costs.
Right, so it's long-term, but sudden price, like timber, for instance, suddenly more expensive, but it's not because we missed something in 1 year, it's because it was baked in from.
Correct.
So, okay, thank you, that helps me understand. Yeah, that helps me understand. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Commissioner Eastman.
So there's city polls are in this as well as county polls. What is the percentage of, is that correct that we have?
Yes.
What percentage of this program is private sector contributions versus work for the city and then for unincorporated areas?
Yeah, so I don't have the breakdown of the rental lights in the incorporated versus unincorporated, but the county has about 5,300 poles. The city has 13,438 poles, and then within the rental program, within the service area, not unincorporated, it's combined, there are 14,090 poles in lights.
All right.
So there's 33,000 total. About half of them, or a little less than half, are in the private side, and the rest are public.
All right. I just wanted to make the point here that a lot of what we're talking about increased cost here is costs that we'll bear here at on the general government side, which is something I want to get into. I might get into that in commissioner comment, or I just do it now unless someone else has more questions. But we have, we essentially have two sections here. We have what the city is working with GRU on streetlights, right? And that was previously in Public Works and then transferred over. What is the history there?
It was previously paid for through Public Works.
Okay.
In at the end of 2022, the City Commission made a motion and adopted a change where it's basically GRU is paying for it and then reducing the GFT contribution by that amount.
That's both for that rub out county contract as well as the city one.
So that is just for the county streetlights.
Okay. And then the city, was the city previously done by Public Works, or has it always been?
Correct, it was previously, and it's still, there was no change to that.
Oh, okay. So the changeover was only on that county.
Correct.
And can someone give background? I've been trying to do some research as to how we got into a position of where we're paying for lights and, I guess, fire hydrants out in the county.
So, Mr. Mayor, I can give a high level, I am not an expert at this, but
It's deep history, man.
there is an oral history that I'm very familiar with. We've tried to do a little bit of kind of digging of contracts and all of that, but essentially back in the 70s, there was a regional utility board that both from a governance standpoint and some ownership was the city and the county. We moved away from the county to where it was the city only governing and owning the utility. As part of that, there were agreements put in place about streetlights and fire hydrants, and the agreements had to do with we still have the right as the utility to use the right of way in the county, and in exchange for that use in the right of way, we pay for the streetlights and fire hydrants that are provided outside of the city limits or within the unincorporated area. And so the city was responsible for that. The city has paid for those streetlights, as we've been referencing, since that time. And again, the only change in the fall was really the accounting mechanism of how that's done, but it was no impact. The Public Works is still paying for that. It's just kind of through a reduction in the GFT instead of a direct billing.
All right, thank you. I was trying to understand, and I was able to find some of that information, and it's, as you mentioned, Mr. Ward, a long, drawn-out history that actually ends with our fellow Commissioner Cynthia Moore Chestnut, hammering out a deal in a particularly aggressive time in 1990 to get that sorted. But it seemed to me that as I'm going through that and looking at it, that one, that's what I found too, is that it was supposed to be paid for out of the surcharges, it looks like, or county commissioners were arguing it should have been paid for out of the surcharges when they were fighting with us about budgets back in the late 80s. But that was certainly for use of right-of-way, which is a franchise fee, right? It is a fee that the utility pays in order to utilize county right-of-ways. And I think there was, and somehow that got onto the general government side, which I think might have made sense for decades, as we were taking a significant amount of profit from the utility above and beyond what we may have gotten in typical franchise fees. But now in this new reality where we're now talking about potentially cleaving off parts of where GRU would be its own authority underneath the city, or even in a world now where we're actually not only not taking excess profit from the utility, but also cutting our overall taxes that the utility would pay. I think it makes sense to me that we reconsider who bears that overall cost, whether that should be on the general government side or the GRU side, because it seems to me like that is an operational expense on GRU that made a lot of sense when we were taking more of the profit of GRU, but might not make so much sense going forward. And so I'm sure that will be a part of the long drawn-out budget discussions and the service level agreements and all of that, but it's something that I think we need to be reconsidering for the future. Yeah. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Willetts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can we get that figure of what the light and pole change will cost city expected to general government in fiscal year 2024?
Yeah. Mr. Mayor, right now the city pays $2.9 million in rough numbers, $2.9 million, or $2,400 and $200 per month. And that, with this increase, the change would go to $266,200 per month, or a net increase per month of $21,969 per month. And if you multiply that by 12, it gets to $263,624 per month. And so that takes the annual bill up to around $3.2 million in round terms. Did you get those?
No, you're
Okay,
welcome.
all right.
An extra 300.
I don't want to show you. I don't want to show you.
300 is what I'm.
An extra 300 a year.
Yeah, so the annual goes from $2.9 million to 3.2.
Okay.
But the annual increase, that the delta is $263,624.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Commissioner Chestnut.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Manager, General Manager, to be clear, what you're saying is that GRU really is not paying the fee, but general government is. Public Works is.
Correct, correct. That's the way it has been since the agreement was in place in the 70s. That is correct.
All right, so that's something we need to look at in terms of having GRU pay it.
I don't think that the manager is agreeing to this, but that is what I am.
Yeah, yeah,
He's
yeah,
nodding his
yeah.
head.
Yeah. So I think that, as we consider the budget, that is what we need to consider. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Chestnut. Commissioner Willetts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I agree with Commissioner Chestnut that there's some opportunities to, again, look real deeply at what is truly fair and appropriate expenditures on general government versus GRU as we go forward, because fewer decisions are going to be made by us on all of these things. Now is our time to stake out, or now is our time to establish a little more of that relationship. And we should do it now rather than later. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Sacco.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Cunningham, when was that, I know I was here for it, it was sometime last year. When did we update the agreement?
So what we did was, and Dan, I might look towards you. I don't think we changed the agreement because but what we did in the fall was we just changed how it was paid. And so there was kind of this circular thing, like GRU would bill the county would pay GRU, the county would go to Public Works and get the refund from them. And so we were trying to clean that up by just making it where we're paying for it directly and then reducing the general fund transfer by that amount. And that happened in late fall.
But we had that discussion up here for a while. Thank you. So my current opinion is if people who were here last year have a problem with it, they should have prepped that up last year in the fall when we talked about it. I don't think 3 months from finalizing it is the appropriate time to tell GRU to figure out a new format. I have no problem, and I hear the concern from Commissioner Woods, we may not have in 3 months the ability to, but I'm not going to tell staff 3 months out from finalizing a budget to go figure out a new formula. Because that's not fair to you, it's not fair to general government, and it's not fair to people who want to know what's going on with their jobs and their taxes. So I have no problem if this is something you guys want to look into. I think it's a little ridiculous to, not even 9 months from the last time we talked about it, say, well, it was wrong then. If it's wrong now, it was wrong then, we should have said something then. But I have no problem looking forward to it, all things in Tallahassee pending. I just don't think prior to finalizing this budget, this budget is not the time to do that if we want to update or modify that, because all the people who would be doing it are kind of here. And they are still trying to figure out a budget, not create a new formula out of thin air that will then impact general government. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner Sacco. Commissioner Eastman.
Sorry to take another stab at this. I do just want to make, we are in a very different world than we were last year. One, the relationship between, even without the potential of us needing to figure out what our arm's distance relationship is from a unit of our government being governed by an entirely different body. But we were previously, as we mentioned, taking both taxes and profit from Gainesville Regional Utilities, which it is the right of the people who own the utility to do. We now, I think it makes sense for us to, as we're going through that, to separate operational expenses probably a little more thoughtfully than we were before, and not necessarily to one benefit or the other's benefit, right? We are the governing body of both entities, but to kind of take a hard look at what actual expenses are on each side and to reconsider that, because it's a very different world now than it was, regardless of what happens with the governor signing HB 1645. And so whatever was decided 9 months ago, I can't, we have a very different place that we have to go to. And if we don't get that sorted out within this budget year, we will not have the opportunity to sort it out, period.
Commissioner Chestnut.
Thank you. And I just want to concur with what Commissioner Eastman has said. So I would like the manager to look at this, because this is a new day. It's a new time, and I think the cost should be borne by GRU, not in general government. Thank you.
So, Mr. Mayor, in terms of, can I get clarity on what to bring back? So I think as the general manager of the utility, this is an expense that we have not borne in 40, 50 years, however long, but since that agreement's been in place. I would not recommend for us to take on that expense going forward. Can I get clarity on what to bring back to the commission? Is there like looking at old agreements and analyzing what those agreements are, what's in there, how it started? What do I need to bring back to the commission?
Correct, Commissioner.
I don't know if there's anything necessarily to bring back to the commission, but we are having budget discussions, and my understanding is this is actively a budget discussion right now between yourself and general government. So it's just, I mean, you've at least heard a couple of different voices on that, and I'm sure we'll be hearing that back before we approve the budget at the end of this year. I mean, unless you have something more specific you would like to bring back.
I don't think we're saying bring back the historical data. I think what we're saying is that the cost needs to be borne by GRU as we go through this budget cycle.
So let me weigh in real quick, and then Commissioner Sacco, what I would like to know is what would that look like if it were in the GRU budget as opposed to in the general government budget? I mean, we know what the number is, but how you make that work in one as opposed to the other is
Yes.
what I'd be interested in.
So just to clarify, so the number we're talking about is the county streetlights. Is that correct?
Yes.
So that number, I think somebody correct me if I'm wrong, going into next year, it's like $1.1 million would be the county streetlights.
Yes, so for Mr. Mayor, for the county, is they previously were paying around $1.1 million, that will increase to $1.2 million. The delta is $165,000 per year change, but that's the county, that's not the.
So that's the county streetlights, and so I think what I'm hearing is so if that $1.2 million is now paid, I mean, that's just an additional operation and maintenance expense for the utility, so it would have a rate impact to the electric system. And we can come back with what that rate impact is if we make that adjustment. So we will do that.
I think that's what folks are asking for. Is that accurate? Is that just, okay. Commissioner Sacco? Okay, good, okay. All right, anything else? So that's the presentation?
That is it.
I see no further lights right now, so Madam Clerk, do we have anybody from the public?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, great. All right, so we'll move on to our next item.
Next, we have member comment.
Okay. Any member? Okay. Commissioner Book. I knew some fingers would head out there if I.
So since we've been in the kind of along the budget discussion, 19+ million is just what we're starting with, that we have to get down. And it is actually likely, as we look at various different areas of the, through the charters we didn't see much movement there. And the things that we're gonna have to cut, it's a figure that is almost unattainable. And so we are gonna have to look at every single thing. So in that regard, I would just agree with some of the comments here that there is nothing today that we're not gonna at least have to consider to get to a figure that we have to be at. And we have to do that within about the next 120 days. So to the extent that we're able to look at the various charters, I know I've had some discussions individually with the various charters. Everyone's budget across every aspect of the city that we bear is gonna actually have to go backwards, period. It's gonna have to be a negative, or we will not get even close to 19 million, and the only way to make that up is to put the burden on the citizens and the community by basically raising almost everything that we have at our disposal, and that's just a terrible position to be in. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner Book. Any other lights? Okay. All right, then, we are adjourned. Thank you.